2 elderly passengers from the Dimond Princess cruise in Japan have died of the coronavirus. The deceased passengers were a man and a woman in their 80s. Professor Kentaro Iwata, an infection control specialist at Kobe University Hospital, criticized Japan's handling of the virus outbreak on the cruise ship.
It turned out that the cruise ship was completely inadequate in terms of the infection control. There was no distinction between the green zone, which is free of infection, and the red zone, which is potentially contaminated by virus. There was no single professional infection control person inside the ship, and there was nobody in charge of infection prevention as a professional. The bureaucrats were in charge of everything.
Dimond Princess, which was carrying nearly 4,000 people, has been quarantined in Yokohama since February 3rd, but passengers were not confined to their rooms until February 5th. Japanese Health Minister Katsunobu Kato defended Tokyo's efforts in a report by NHK, saying, quote, "We have, to the extent possible, taken appropriate steps to prevent serious cases." Yet even as the first passengers disembarked on Wednesday, Japanese authorities announced 79 new cases were discovered on board. The rapid spread of the virus on this ship makes it the largest cluster of infections outside mainland China. A second group of about 600 Japanese and foreign passengers are set to disembark on Thursday after spending 2 weeks quarantined on board. Countries like Australia and the United States have begun evacuating their citizens, with plans to quarantine them again upon return.
A terror attack in Germany. 11 are dead in a murder spree that started in 2 separate hookah lounges. Tonight, authorities say the suspected gunman appears to have been motivated by racist far-right views. The massacre in the Frankfurt suburbs of Hanau erupted around 10 o'clock last night. James Longman has more on this incident and why German Chancellor Angela Merkel is calling racism a poison in that nation's society.
Tonight, a far-right terror attack in the heart of a migrant community in Germany. A man opening fire in this hookah lounge in Hanau near Frankfurt. Gun casings and broken glass the only sign of the carnage inside. He then drove to this second cafe nearby to continue his spree. This man was shot in the arm. He says he laid on top of someone and pretended to be dead. Police say the man killed 9 people before they tracked his black BMW to a local address, finding the suspect and his 72-year-old mother dead inside. He's been identified only as 43-year-old Tobias R. Authorities are examining writings and a video in which he reportedly expresses desire to exterminate certain races and details conspiracy theories about the United States. Authorities say his attacks had an explicit anti-foreigner motive.
I would understand Frankfurt or Berlin, okay, but Hanau? I can't believe it.
After the killings, thousands turned out in solidarity across the country.
We came here expecting to find a vigil, but actually it feels more like a rally. There's been an uptick in far-right attacks here in Germany, and people here are angry. They feel the politics of hate is on the rise.
This is the 3rd far-right attack in Germany in just the last 9 months, a worrying trend.
James Longman joins us now from Hanau, Germany. James, give us a sense of the concern over there about these far-right attacks.
Yeah, Lindsay, I mean, Angela Merkel said it herself. She called this a poison in German society. And this is something that's been going on for quite some time. The last time, actually, I was in Germany was just in October at a synagogue attack in Halle, which is a town just near Berlin. An individual entered there, killed 2 people and injured many others. Months earlier, a pro-migration politician, if you like, here was assassinated by a far-right group. And just last week, in fact, a terror plot, 12 people were arrested for their plans to attack mosques across this country. It was kind of a recreation of what we saw in New Zealand, and that anniversary, of course, is coming up next month. So this is pervasive, and it's a real worry for German authorities.
And speaking of pervasive, vigils across, like you're standing in front of, have been happening quite often across Germany. Has that struck a chord?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, we went to a vigil tonight, and it felt more like a political rally. You know, people here are angry. What they see as hatred being stirred up. I think it goes back to 2015, the migration crisis. We remember those pictures of huge numbers of people coming from the Middle East and North Africa. It has changed the demographic balance here in Germany, I think it's fair to say. Just more than 2 million people came here. There were legitimate concerns that people had, but those concerns have been turned into hatred, both on a political sense at the ballot box. We've seen the AfD, a far-right party, gain power here, but also in people's minds. And I think that's what's really concerning here. And this individual who struck these shisha bars here in town and then killed his mother and then killed himself is part of a wider problem, not just in Germany, but across Europe, actually. Nationalism very much on the march. Lindsay.
U.S. intelligence officials warned lawmakers last week that Russia is meddling in U.S. elections yet again. That's according to a source who spoke to Reuters. A week later, U.S. President Donald Trump replaced his head of intelligence. And according to a Thursday New York Times report, the disclosure angered Trump, who berated Director of National Intelligence Joseph Maguire a day later. The Times sources say he rebuked Maguire for allowing his staff to appear at the briefing. Their report quoted 5 people familiar with the matter. That was last week. On Wednesday, Trump said he was replacing Maguire on an acting basis with Richard Grenell, a fervent Trump loyalist. Last week's classified briefing was given to the House Intelligence Committee, a group led by Democrats. Intelligence officials said Russia wanted to cast doubt on the integrity of the 2020 election, while boosting Trump's chances at a second term. The Reuters source said Trump's Republican allies were quick to challenge the idea of fresh Russian meddling. Committee Republicans and the White House did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence has declined to comment. U.S. intelligence officials have concluded that Russia used fake news and cyber attacks to help Trump beat Democrat Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. Moscow denies the allegation, and Trump himself has continued to dismiss the finding and deny
his pick for the acting head of the intelligence community, the Director of National Intelligence, Richard Grenell. This is a very controversial figure, and because he's been named to be an acting head of the DNI, he doesn't have to be Senate confirmed.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. So the president made this announcement overnight. Richard Grenell, currently the U.S. ambassador to Germany, also a fierce Trump loyalist, will be the acting director of national intelligence. He is a divisive figure, has a sharp Twitter presence. He has clashed with European allies and many others. And critics importantly say he has no intelligence-related experience to lead the 17 agencies that he will head up, including the CIA. Grenell replaces Joe Maguire. He was also in this role in an acting capacity. And as you note, because Grenell is acting, he does not need to be confirmed by the Senate. The Senate's top Democrat already complaining about this pick, arguing the president is effectively trying to sidestep the Senate's critical role approving such consequential figures. The president's relationship, as you know, with the intelligence community has been rocky. The critics warn the president's politicizing this post with this hire, but it will give him an outspoken ally overseeing agencies he's expressed suspicion of. Savannah?
But at a certain point, you got to ask yourself, why did this pattern arise? Why is it especially the case among your supporters?
I don't think it is especially the case, by the way.
That's just not true. Look, well, people know.
Pete, if you want to talk to some of the...
New fallout tonight from that moment in the debate where Mayor Pete Buttigieg challenged Senator Bernie Sanders over the behavior of his supporters. The so-called Bernie Bros have been accused of bullying tactics and abusive tactics. Minnesota Attorney General and former deputy chair of the Democratic National Committee, Keith Ellison, said today, "Can someone send me an example of a Bernie Bro being bad?" To which Republican Congressman Steve Scalise, who, remember, he was shot and nearly killed by a self-described Sanders supporter back in 2017, he replied, "I can think of an example." So let's bring in tonight's power panel. We've got Democratic strategist Teslin Figaro and Reuters White House correspondent Jeff Mason. So Teslin, I'll start with you. It's kind of tough to argue with that response from Scalise.
It's absolutely tough to argue with that. The only people who are arguing with that and attacking him are anonymous people on Twitter. You know, myself, even working for Bernie Sanders, I think that was really a powerful statement, you know, for him to make, to remind people how real this can get for a lot of folks who are being driven by the type of toxic environment that we see on social media. So I think a lot of people probably, unfortunately, forgot about that incident. That would have been great for Mayor Pete to bring that up on yesterday, to really bring some concrete knowledge, concrete example on what actually happened to the congressman. So I just think that's it. We really should just be quiet. You know, those who want to say, what about this happened? What about that? What about isms? You know, respect the fact that the man almost lost his life. And certainly Senator Bernie Sanders has to, you know, continue to tell his base and his supporters that this stuff is unacceptable.
Well, now that you mention it, it's actually kind of surprising that Mayor Pete did not bring that up. Jeff Mason, how big of a problem are the so-called Bernie bros for Bernie Sanders?
Well, I think some of Bernie Sanders' opponents on that stage want to be sure and emphasize it as a problem. I mean, if you look broadly, of course, at Bernie Sanders' performance right now, he's the front runner. He's clearly doing extremely well in the polls. He did very well in Iowa and New Hampshire and is looking good in the next couple states that are coming up. So it would be misleading to suggest that the Bernie bros are really having a huge impact in terms of tamping down the enthusiasm that people have for him right now. But you saw the criticism on the stage. You played the clip of Mayor Pete, and I expect that we will probably continue to see more of the Democratic candidates who are trying to sort of tamper down Bernie Sanders' momentum, continue to raise this issue.
Well, and the big headline, of course, from the debate last night was Mayor Bloomberg just getting a real pummeling from all of the other candidates on the stage. And it really continued today. Listen to Elizabeth Warren, Senator Elizabeth Warren, who was on The View today, and we'll get your reaction on the other side.
The Democrats should not appoint someone who has a history of embracing racially outrageous practices. After his performance tonight, I have no doubt he is about to drop tonight another $100 million from this campaign.
Why would his performance lead to more spending?
Oh, come on. In order to try to erase America's memory of what happened on that debate stage. Mike Bloomberg, drop out of the race. Keep putting your money in to help Democrats beat Donald Trump and just take your ego out of this.
Well, Jason Rantz, who is a Seattle talk show host, joins us now. Thanks for joining the conversation. And I'll start with you. I mean, how much do these attacks from Warren on Bloomberg, how much do they help her?
I don't really think it helps her, certainly not in the short term. So she's going after
everybody said she said such a great debate performance last night.
She did have a great debate performance. Unfortunately, all it did was probably weaken Michael Bloomberg and not actually help her campaign. She's going after the exact same voting base as Bernie Sanders. So by not going after Bernie Sanders, I don't know if you've done anything to sort of carve out the amount of support that he has. She's going to go into Nevada this weekend, maybe come in number 3, more likely number 4, go into South Carolina where she's going to be a distant 4th or 5th. I don't necessarily see what her plan is other than trying to pretend that she's no longer sort of further to the left of a Pete Buttigieg and an Amy Klobuchar, and in a situation where you've got a convention that is going to be brokered. Maybe she comes out there and says, I'm not as quite far to the left as Bernie Sanders, and I'm not someone who's trying to buy the election like Michael Bloomberg.
Teslin, do you think that Senator Warren should have gone on the attack sooner? I mean, I was following her in New Hampshire, and she was just talking about how she is the candidate of unity. Now we're seeing kind of a different side of her. Is it too little, too late?
Well, that's because Bloomberg was an easy target. He was a new kid on the block, and he was the billionaire, the epitome of all what they talked about. But let me just give it to you straight shot with no chaser. And the first disclaimer I want to say is I gave her winner for last night. I'm a huge Elizabeth Warren fan, but there was not one person on that stage that has not been accused of a toxic work environment. There wasn't a candidate. Several candidates on that stage have been accused of sexual harassment within the workplace, including Bernie Sanders. Joe Biden was also accused of personal touching in people's space. Also, Senator Warren represented corporations. There was a company that she represented that women were trying to sue for breast implants. How many non-disclosure agreements did they sign? So at the end of the day, every last one of us had an issue with criminal justice, racism, and so forth. And so Bloomberg just didn't do a good job. And I'm not a spokesperson for Bloomberg, not a fan of Bloomberg. I'm just simply stating the facts that not one of them could cast a stone based upon their own records. And so it was just a really poor performance. But shout out to her for beating him to a pulp. I mean, clearly she did. Clearly she won. And we can't go back and correct Iowa. Obviously, we don't even still know who won that. We can't correct New Hampshire. But I think it did show her value because she was certainly being erased.
Teslin, I've only got a little bit of time left, so I want to talk about another bit of news that is breaking tonight. New York Times has a new story out tonight. The headline, Russia backs Trump's re-election and he fears Democrats will exploit its support. And the gist of it is there was a classified briefing to lawmakers, according to the New York Times, that angered the president, who complained that Democrats would weaponize the disclosure. Jeff Mason, you are a White House correspondent. This is your beat. What are you hearing?
Well, I think, number one, that's not the type of report that President Trump wants to see. He is certainly on a high right now. He's been doing very well in the polls. He's out campaigning in a bunch of states this week. He's passed impeachment. And then you have Russia coming back with a briefing that was done by people from his own administration. Now, obviously, if what the briefing said was factual, then that's something that the Congress wants and needs to know about. But he was upset about it, and that apparently is one of the reasons why he's swapping out the DNI.
So Russia may be coming back, but perhaps not all that surprising given what Russia did in the 2016 election. Jeff Mason, Teslin Figaro, and Jason Rance.
They brought something with me today. Now, that last night in the debate, if I can, just for a minute here, last night in the debate, I had an exchange with Mayor Bloomberg about the question about sexual harassment and discrimination that had occurred, and there have been many allegations about this. And he said on the stage that no, it had just really been about a few jokes that he'd told, that people hadn't been able to take a joke, and that, but the people on the other side, we think mostly women, had to sign non-disclosure agreements, which means they are legally bound not to tell their side of the story. He can tell his side of the story, but they can't tell theirs. And so I asked him if he would release all of those people from the non-disclosure agreements. This is an election for President of the United States, and transparency here is important. So I used to teach contract law, and I thought I would make this easy. I wrote up a release and covenant not to sue, and all that Mayor Bloomberg has to do is download it, I'll text it, sign it, and then the women or men will be free to speak and tell their own stories. And if I can, I just want to read the relevant language. Bloomberg and the company release any and all obligations contained in any agreement, including but not limited to any employment, settlement, severance, or non-disclosure agreement between Bloomberg and or the company and any other person to the extent those obligations preclude the other person from disclosing information relating to sexual harassment, discrimination, or other misconduct at the company or by Bloomberg himself. Under this release, it is now the other person's choice to disclose such information or not. I think that the mayor should sign this and that we all have a right to see.
Delegates are now beginning to look at which Democratic candidate is in the best place to defeat Donald Trump. I think some of them are beginning to understand that it's Bernie Sanders.
If you do not secure the majority of pledged delegates, do you still believe that superdelegates should switch and back you, in essence, rejecting the opinion of the voters?
If those superdelegates conclude that Bernie Sanders is the best candidate, the strongest candidate to defeat Trump and anybody else, yes, I would very much welcome their support.
Should the person with the most pledged delegates be the Democratic nominee?
Well, I think if that was the only criteria, then you get rid of all of the superdelegates, which may not be a bad idea. But you do have superdelegates. You got 700 superdelegates. And I am not a great fan of superdelegates, but their job is to take an objective look at reality. And I think the reality is that we are the stronger candidates. So those superdelegates who came on board before I was even in the race, you have got the very grave responsibility to make sure that Trump does not become elected president of the United States. Vote for the strongest candidate.
In fact, Hillary Clinton wins the majority of pledged delegates on top of what she's done with superdelegates. Are you going to try to turn them?
Yeah, we are. We're on the phone right now.
You'd be defying history. You'd be defying the will of the voter, right? Hillary
well,
Clinton
defying history is what this campaign has been about.
I think that the will of...
And I don't know if anybody watched last night's debate. It got very big ratings. And you know what? Mini Mike didn't do well last night. I was going to send him a note saying, it's not easy doing what I do, is it? Not easy. It's not easy, Mike. Not easy for any of them. No, Mike didn't do too well. He went way down. It's all right. Mini Mike. How about Klobuchar? Did you see her? She choked. She choked. She choked. She couldn't breathe. Alfred E. Newman looked at her and said something slightly derogatory. And she said, "Are you accusing me of being dumb?" Who would make a statement like that? Because that's really what he was doing, but he doesn't want to say that. No, how about that? Are you saying I'm dumb? That was the end of her campaign in my book, you know. You don't say that. Even if it's true, you don't say that. Right? Bloomberg made a fool out of himself last night. He choked. He's another one. He's going, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Don't ask me the question. Please. I look at my wife. I said, let's send him a little note. It's not so easy up there to do what I did, right? Not so easy. I became president because of the debates, because unlike Mini Mike, I could answer questions.